Welcome to Expats Everywhere. Can you tell us your name, where you're from, and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Andrea Lawrence, and I was born in the United States of America. I'm a U.S. citizen. I lived in the States for about 11 years and then moved to Singapore with my family. And I lived there for about 7 years and then went to university back in the States. So, kind of from the States and Singapore.
Okay, and so you've been living out of the United States for a while.
Mhm.
What countries have you worked in outside of the U.S.?
My first teaching job was after I graduated with my ed degree from university, undergrad. I went to Afghanistan, and I was there for about a year and a half. Not continually. There was the summer during the summer I was gone, then went back for half a year, and then the school ended up closing, so I ended up going to another place. I worked in Bangladesh for a little bit, and then came back to Singapore to work. So.
How come the school closed?
Mostly due to security issues. It was a very unfortunate thing and lamented over a lot.
Okay, so you only did a half a year, and then the school said for security reasons.
In my second year, yeah, we only did half a year. So.
Okay, so what was it like working in Afghanistan?
It was very different than the other countries that I've lived in. A lot more conservative, very different standards of living. That the cost of living was a lot lower than I was used to, and there were a lot of clothing and food, and even the way that they viewed women and the way that the impact that had culturally was different than I was used to. So it was different, but I actually really enjoyed it.
Okay, so you were a teacher. Did you know of anyone else who did other jobs or just teachers?
I mostly just ran with or got to know other teachers in that at that school. There were a couple of families that we got to know who were expats as well, living there, working for other non-governmental organizations, and so there were some pilots and some other expats that we got to know doing different jobs there that allowed them to be there to help construct the country again and to help them. But mostly the ones that I saw were shopkeepers, and there were kind of small businesses almost, but not quite expanded businesses, like a lot of businesses starting out. There was a juice store that opened up, and they started to have more business the more time we were there and spent time there. A lot of non-shops, so you could find a lot of people like just baking bread and selling bread all day long. So a lot of very basic jobs. I didn't see very many corporate or business people.
Now, were these locals or expats that were opening these shops?
The shops were mostly locals, ones that we went to. The expats weren't. I'm not sure about the ability that they had to own a shop or to own anything really. So a lot of the expats who were living there were renting property. So I think to live there, might have had to be like a permanent resident or something like that. So yeah, most of the locals had the jobs as drivers. There were a lot of drivers, and they would drive people who worked for the government or worked for big corporations. So you didn't see them quite as often, but imagine that they would be in the more expensive cars that were driving around. That were either armored vehicles. There were a lot of security guards. A lot of people will work for a lot of locals will work for security organizations and then be hired out to protect different houses or different people when they came in, things like that. So.
Did you make friends with the locals, or how was that?
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to be able to teach a lot of the national people there. So we got to meet a lot of families who had been traveling around a lot and were there mostly to go to the school because it was an international school and it was nationally accredited in that area through the Middle States Association. And so that was a very big pull for people to be there. So we got to know those people, but we also got to know some of the locals who couldn't afford to send their kids to a nice school, but were able to send their kids because they worked there. So that was an incredible opportunity to get to know some of them. And due to the security restraints that we had as teachers there, with the school, we weren't able to visit a lot of people's houses. So we kind of got to know them a little bit at school, and then a few people outside of the campus and the compound, but not a ton, so somewhat.
Okay, so you were a teacher. Tell us what a typical day would look like.
All the teachers lived on the compound, so the buildings that we lived in, slept in, and lived and worked in were very, very close to the buildings that we taught in. And a lot of those were houses that they just transformed into classrooms and administrative buildings and offices and things like that. So we would wake up, get ready for the day, and then we would either walk to our classroom to work or just go straight to the morning meeting at the very beginning of the day. And I don't know if many other schools did that, but we had a special meeting together to be able to either sing together, pray together, or do things together. And then we started the school day, go through the school day, taking attendance, accepting the kids in, going through lessons. I was in a preschool position. It was only half day, so I had a morning class and afternoon class. So that was a little different schedule than everyone else. But during lunchtime, we would all be able to go to, not really a cafeteria, but a building where a smaller building, kind of like a house, and just eat in the dining room-ish area that had several large tables. And so we could go there to get lunch if we worked at the school. So we were able to have a cook there who helped cook meals for lunch and dinner for the teachers who lived on camp at the compound too. So we had lots of meals taken care of, which was a really big blessing and great the first year of teaching to not have to worry about like buying groceries and making food every day. So
Did you have to pay for
that was
those meals?
nice. It worked into our living expenses for rent and things that while we were living there. So just being specifically in that school and in that community, working for that group, we got those benefits. That was really nice.
That is nice.
And then after school, we would bring the kids to the large gym area, and there were gates around each of the building areas, so we were able to be in there fairly safely, and the cars would come on campus to pick kids up, or the kids had passes to be able to go through the gates. Yeah, through the gates, through past the security and through the gates to get home. So it was a little bit different in that because we had to try and get the kids off campus and didn't have a lot of after-school activities, especially the years that I was there because of security. So that looked a little different than normally. But then we could work in our classrooms or do whatever we wanted to on the compound until dinner, and after dinner we're free to do whatever. So.
What did you typically wear to work?
We had to keep very covered for the most part, but we didn't have to wear burqas necessarily. Well, not really at all. We just had to keep our arms covered all the way to about our wrists or between our wrists and elbows. That could be, the shortest could be about there. So we can wear sleeves underneath a shorter shirt or something like that, but trying to be more conservative, not tight fitting clothes, more loose flowing clothes, longer shirts. Shirts they were supposed to come past, almost to our knees, down to almost our knees. So a lot of us girls would wear like a long sleeve dress or something, and then wear pants underneath it, and then our legs had to be covered all the way down to our ankles. So mostly layers, which I really appreciated because I, for some reason, just really like wearing layers. And we tried to wear closed-toed shoes for the most part, and it was very dusty there, and dust accumulates a lot. So we wear those like walking just from our building to whatever building we're teaching in or working in. And in the street that that went down between the houses of the compound, there was kind of this big box of houses on one side and houses on the other side. So it was like this city street, and on either ends were the gates and the guards. And so each of the buildings, like areas, had walls around them, and then down the middle of the street was where cars could go up and down, and we had Hescos and speed bumps, so someone couldn't just charge straight through if they got through past the gates. So we kind of had to wind around and go down. And so when we were walking up and down the streets, the guards could see us, so we tried to cover our heads with just they call it a chador, or just a scarf, basically, that we can get from pretty much anywhere, and then keep our hair and neck covered for the most part. So, and once we were in the classrooms, we didn't have to necessarily keep our heads covered, but to be fairly covered, we had to be outside of our houses. We tried to cover up more.
What do you wear when you go off the compound?
We wear an abaya, the traditional just black, long outerwear, I guess, and it looks a lot like a long black jacket would, without opening up all the time. Sometimes they would have buttons to cover up, and the women there, they often, when they wore those out, would have them very colorful and very beaded, and have lots of showy pieces on them, but we just tried to get plain ones so it didn't stick out quite as much. We wear those over our clothes when we went out, and a lot of times we keep them on. Every once in a while, if we went to someone's house or something, we could take that part off to wear our conservative clothes underneath in that place. But generally, we kept our heads covered too with a scarf. So
What would the guys wear?
they had it a lot easier. They basically just tried not to wear shorts, so they could wear pants and slacks or khakis or any of those, I think. But they tried to wear longer sleeves as well. So
Did they have to wear ties to work?
no, they didn't. They could have just worn like a plain, comfortable, formal-looking shirt. So tried not to be too casual, but also long sleeve. But it wasn't very formal since it was in lots of houses and we didn't go out quite as much. So that was nice.
All right, so how much money can someone make working in Afghanistan?
It really depends on the job. Fortunately for the job that we had, we made as a starting teacher, I made 20-some thousand a year, which for me, from working part time for several years, seemed great. It was wonderful, especially getting the benefits and things of a full time job that I never had before. But the rent was very expensive, so depending on what rent was, took a lot. It could have taken a lot of the paycheck, and for a lot of expats, because the locals or the landowners saw that they were white, would expect more money from them, whether they had enough money or not. So that was probably one of the most expensive parts. But like for the most part, the food is fairly cheap, and being able to not buying imported things all the time and having some local things saved a lot of money. So the cost of living was low enough that it was pretty affordable to live under that pay range for the most part, and I was also paying back student loans as well. So taking into account all of that, it worked out very nicely. I'm not sure what the locals make to be able to be paid to make it very well, and they make it comfortably with a family, especially a lot of those families have lots of kids. So the main pay from what the people on campus who were maintenance or house cleaners or were able to work those jobs without being fully literate, even in their own language, they were, from what we heard and what we've understood, they were paid fairly well. But they were paid more than some of the other local jobs that they might have found around there. And there are kids and I think parents and men and women who were beggars as well on the streets. So the typical pay range, I'm not really sure what it is, but we had.
But for you, you said it was around 20,000 a year or so.
And that was as a first year teacher.
So, and that's enough for rent, to eat, travel. Were you able to travel with that money?
Yeah, I actually saved a lot to be able to travel, and because over most of the breaks, like Christmas break and summer break, we had to leave the compound. We had to leave the country. We couldn't technically stay there, so we were able to visit lots of different places. And it was nice because Dubai was close by, so the flight to Dubai was relatively cheap depending on the time of year, and from Dubai we could pretty much go anywhere. Finding flights that didn't have the flight to Dubai made it a little bit easier to transfer and buy flights and look for cheaper options generally. Those were harder to find flying right out of Kabul rather than right out of Dubai. So that made it a little bit more difficult, but still a good kind of lily to jump off of in the pond of the world.
So what percentage a month would you say you could save from your paycheck?
That's a good question. I didn't keep track of it too closely. I just tried not to spend very often. So I roundabout, just going off the top of my head, I would say maybe a quarter or a third I would save, and then the other stuff I would either use or have to pay for something else. The rent and different things like that came out of our paycheck, our phone bills, rent, food for our groceries for our chef, and things like that were cost of living for living on the compound. Those were taken out. We never saw them, so I didn't keep very close tabs on those funds because they were able to pay us. It was a USA funded project, so because we had US aid, it was a little bit easier to be able to get paid in the United States and not have to transfer money over back and forth and have a local bank account. So that helped a lot too.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
All right, so if you have a job, you're ready to go, how much money should you take with you just to get started before your first paycheck?
The exchange rate, I think, was about 55 AFs to a US dollar. So I remember going to the grocery store and being like, oh, I need to take 1,000 AFs, and that would be about a good amount to get several things from the shop around the corner. So bringing that much seemed like a lot because of just the exchange rate, but I guess to start off without having any pay at the beginning, you mean? Or
yeah, just like you move there, you need money before you get your first paycheck.
That's a good question. It would kind of depend on how far away you lived. So how much you would need to pay a driver to bring you to work, or if you had your driver, if you had to pay a lot for rent, if you shared it with a lot of people. Those are some pretty big factors on price-wise because I think that can make a big difference.
So maybe show up with like $1,000 just in case, or is that way too much, not enough?
Maybe a couple $1,000s. There is some, they call them bakshish, is kind of like a gift, or sometimes they would ask for a bakshish or like a gift to help like a poor person, or if even if an official was trying to, like, seeing lots of foreigners say, oh, these people have money, then they'll ask for some sort of tax or levy or things like that. And those can be unpredictable. So having money on hand for those situations could be helpful. Generally, if you know people there who know what things should be paid for and what things are just completely inappropriate and don't need to be paid at all, then that can save some money too. So maybe I would say several thousand would be good to start off for the first month or so, depending on which part of the country you live in. Also, in the main city in Kabul, would be a little bit more expensive than farther out, I think.
Okay. So what kind of clothing should you pack, or what things should you pack when you move there? What's the weather like?
Conservative clothing. The weather actually changes quite a lot more than I thought it would, and what I expected when I first got the job to move over there. They have very, very cold winters, and it gets very, very hot in the summer. So most of the summer we weren't there, so bringing clothes for that is maybe like a longer sleeved things, so that you don't have to put as many layers on to get the amount of skin cover that you need to. That helped a lot in the summers. Getting fans helped a lot too, though. So we just had to have long clothing, but maybe like thinner material would help. But a lot of long sleeves. Actually, for the things that we had shorter sleeves, we brought cardigans to just put over, and that helped a lot to help with the heat and everything. So then once we were indoors and in a more like safe place without lots of locals around, we could take their cardigans off and be a little bit cooler. But yeah, the long sleeved things that weren't too thick material helped in the summer, but then really thick material helped in the winter too, to have more layers of things. So I would typically wear leggings underneath my pants, which were underneath my dress or something like that. So
does it snow there?
Yeah, it gets really cold, and the insulation in the house is not fantastic. So it can get very cold in your house all the time unless you have some sort of heater, and that can get expensive to fuel in the winter. So depending on which way you go, gas or fuel, or what danger level you want to take on.
Okay.
Yeah.